Squidward suicide. I mean, it couldn't be any more self-explanatory. It was only a matter of time before he finally blew his brains out from all the retarded BS that goes on in his daily life. This pasta is gory, bizarre, and really capitalizing the whole hyper-realistic card that is often just scattered around in other pastas just for shock value. Although in this pasta it works because the gore and hyper-realism used here it comes in gradually and sucks you in with the build-up and the eerie atmosphere. To me, it seems kind of odd that no one at Nickelodeon Studios has tried to debunk this myth of the possible existence of the Squidward suicide video, but maybe it's a strategy. Just keep in mind that this story really goes for the gore and the details, so if this screams type, I suggest you watch another video. So the pasta starts out with an unnamed intern explaining his experience along with a few other employees watching Squidward suicide. The intern explains that back in early 2005, he, two other interns, and the lead animators and sound editors went to the editing room to go watch what was supposed to be the season 4 episode, Fear of a Krabby Patty. Now, considering that the episode isn't finalized, sometimes the animators would give an inside joke to the editors by putting up a mock title card, like how sex doesn't work instead of Walkabout Bivai, when Spongebob and Patrick find and adopt a sea scalp. So when the title card Squidward Suicide popped up, they didn't think of it more than a morbid joke. The episode started out normal after that. It started with Squidward playing his clarinet, hitting some sour notes like usual. Spongebob could be heard laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he had a concert that night and needs to practice. Spongebob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is where things begin to seem off. While Squidward plays, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. When he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. It's not like normal cartoon booing, but you can clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, which is very much unlike him. What is odder than that is that everyone in the crowd had red, hyper-realistic eyes. It wasn't like the shots of real people's eyes, but it was a bit more real than CGI. The group that was watching the video was obviously confused, but since they weren't the writers, they didn't question its appeal to children yet. It then cut to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his window showed that it was nighttime, so it wasn't too long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there was no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It was like as if the speakers were turned off, though the status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands or tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All in the while, the sound in the background was very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen started to zoom into Squidward's face very slowly as his sobbing was getting louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit as the wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm was brewing somewhere. The eerie part is this sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. Below the sound of the wind sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. After 30 seconds, the screen blurred and twitched violently as something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over his upturned face popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach cruelly cut open and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime take, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were all of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking like as if you touched it you would get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it was that of a gale blowing through the forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach too, her bare gets in a pool of blood next to her. The left eye was too popped out and popped. naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above another crew cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street and the photograph for shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit and one entered, the only female in the room ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo play, Squidward was silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsing. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all is that his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did a deep voice laughing, and this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped, dangling, blood trickling down from it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played him quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not like as if there were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the frames were shown, all screaming and all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and that deep voice said, "Do it!" And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun to his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him, and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling and what is left of his head on about the floor, staring blankly at it. That's where the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry about this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was just a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have been glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came out of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I've had something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things.